for a number of reasons, which inshallah will become apparent as we go through it. The example I'm going to give you today, the opposite example, is that of the son of Nuh alayhi salam. And when I read the story in the Quran, I'm actually filled with sadness. But I realize how illuminating and how true that story rings even today, in the climate and the atmosphere that we live in. And it's part of the reason why our religion is, for all times. So you may know that the only characterization of Prophet Noah's son begins when the moment that the storm has begun, which in itself is telling. That is that we're introduced to the son of Noah in the midst of a terrible day, in the midst of confusion, mayhem, and this terrible, terrible storm. And Prophet Noah says, وَقَالَ أَرْقَبُ فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرِهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا إِنَّ رَبِّي لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. He says, embark therein, as in embark into the ark in the name of Allah, and its course, that is the course of the ark, and its resting surely will be guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful. Bismillah majriha wa mursaha, inna rabbi la ghafurur rahim. But who especially did not embark on this great ship as it began to sail amidst its huge waves? It was, of course, his son. And we are told that he had separated himself. So this was a conscious decision. It was not a mistake that in all of that confusion, he got left behind, like, in Home Alone or something like that. This was a conscious decision that he had made. So what does Noah do? When he sees his son not on the ship amongst these huge waves that are going on, what does any parent do? He calls to him. He tries to reason with him. He says, Ya bunayya. Now remember, we talked about this endearing term about how Luqman and Ibrahim refers to his son. Ya bunayya, oh my dear son. Arqab ma'ana wa la takun ma'al kafirin. Oh my dear son, come abroad with us and do not be with the disbelievers. But what does the son who thinks he knows it all, how does he reply? And some commentators say his name is Canaan, others say it's Yam. He says, I shall take refuge on the Jabal, on the mountain. Wasimuni min al-ma'ah. It will save me, i.e. the Jabal will save me from the water. But he's clearly wrong. He thinks he knows it all. He lives in a climate which is antagonistic to his father and to his father's beliefs. And he's slipped into that disbelief himself. But unfortunately, he thinks that he is in the right, whereas clearly he is in the wrong. This is, of course, something that could happen to any of us in this climate in which we live and with our children. And that's part of the reason why we're doing this whole series. And then Noah points out to him, this day, there is no savior from the decree of Allah except someone upon whom he has mercy. Now, interestingly, when Noah says that there's no savior, he doesn't say there is no one who can save you. He says there is nothing. There is no savior. There's no mountain, no structure, nothing that can save you. But yet, unfortunately, the son does not listen. He is lost, he is deluded. And you can understand the mountain, by the way, to refer to a false sense of security or permanence that disbelievers will assign to the world. So that when we are in this context, we assign a permanence to things around us, to our possessions. And in this case, he assigned a permanence to the mountain that this will save him. And of course it doesn't. Then the wave comes between them and the father, he does not see his son. The son disappears. And he knows that he has not listened. He knows that he has disbelieved. But his love as a parent makes him call out to Allah. ونادى نوح ربه فقال ربي إن ابني من أهلي وإن وعدك الحق وأنت أحكم الحاكمين. Nuh called out to his Lord, saying, my Lord, certainly my son is also of my family. Your promise is surely true, and you are the most just of all judges. Ahkamul hakimin, the just of all judges. Now this just harks back to the point that Allah had said that he would save Noah's family who were righteous. But then Allah tells him now that this son of yours is not of your family, his work is unrighteous. So ask not of me that of which you have no knowledge. I admonish you, Allah is admonishing him, lest you be one of the ignorant. And Noah immediately responds. He takes it back. He says, oh my Lord, I seek refuge with you from asking something of which I have no knowledge. If you do not forgive me and have mercy upon me, I shall be among the losers. So there's so many lessons here for us to learn. And I really want to get to Sister Najiba. So I'll just quickly touch on some of the larger ones. One of the most prominent to me is that even the prophets, even some of the greatest prophets, had children who were not on the right path. That just because the father or the mother believe does not mean that the son or the daughter will necessarily be believers, will be those who submit to Allah. Now, it's not clear at all that actually even knew that his son disbelieved. The suggestion is that actually he did not know, and Allah tells him not to ask that for which he had no knowledge. So again, this brings us to the fact of how well do we really know our children? And this is something that, inshallah, we were hoping to learn from Sister Najiba today, in terms of how can we decipher that inner personality and increase our knowledge of our children. And how can we really learn our children's unique personalities and how they are different from each other. He had 3 other brothers who, alhamdulillah, were steadfast Muslims. And this story also teaches us that parents fail, and even the best parents fail. Of course, we want so desperately not to fail. Nuh tried everything he could, but Allah in his infinite wisdom and mercy, he knows best. We as parents can only do so much. And then each of us then has to chart our own destiny. And Islam, after a certain age, even our children have to chart that destiny. And we are only responsible for our own actions. So this is a great lesson for us and for our children to learn, that they also become responsible for their own actions, and that we cannot protect them always. We have to give them the tools and then entrust them to the Most High. And then just to kind of complete the whole thing, as for Noah and his other children and his family, after this dua where he asked for forgiveness, it is said, oh Noah, disembark in peace from us and with our blessings upon you and the people who are with you, and upon the nations that will descend from you and those who are with you. But then we are told that there are nations that will come from those who are on the ark with Noah, who will then start to disbelieve, and Allah will provide for them, but eventually a painful punishment will come to those who will end up disbelieving. So it's kind of an interesting kind of cycle that turns, and how we have to keep our hearts and our minds constantly thinking of Allah and hearkening back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and doing dua for forgiveness if we make mistakes, and then inshallah trying to inculcate all of this in our children. So akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. With that, I will hand it over to you, Sister Najiba.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Faisal. Actually, that was a great introduction to what I'm going to talk about tonight, because in that story, as you mentioned, it really shows us the extent of our own power when it comes to what we are able to do as parents, and no matter what expectations we might have of our children, or as hard as we may try, that recognition that it's Allah who guides, and it's Allah who really is the one who makes things happen, that we're actually not the ones that make things happen in the larger sense of that idea. And for me, this content that I've been talking about and presenting tonight about the personality of our children, it really emphasizes that point. And for me, when I came across this content and I started to apply these lenses to my children, it actually helped me kind of breathe a sigh of relief, in a sense. This understanding that it wasn't me solely, or me and my husband solely, who are going to shape our children's every aspect of their character and personality and their ways. It wasn't all about if we do this, then they will turn out like this, but rather this recognition that they come to us with their own template. They come to us with their own soul and their own way of looking at the world. And so, we're really here to guide them on their journey, to be with them on their journey, but not so much to mold them to our particular design. And I think these stories from the Quran, powerfully show us that our power is limited. And so it's just a lesson in humility. So I really appreciated that story to start us out tonight. So I'm going to start with sharing my screen. Just click this here. Okay, so many of you were with us last week. Some of you might be joining for the first time. We do actually have the video from last week available. So I believe that's going to be on our ICB YouTube page. So if you haven't seen the first part, you can go back and watch that. And if you need that, you can email me or Dr. Faisal for the link for that. So last week, we started out talking about this concept of using this system called the Enneagram to understand human motivation and behavior. And one of the things I talked about last time was, how this is a really powerful system to understand ourselves and to understand others. I created this slide to sort of summarize what we talked about last week. So last week, we went around the circle from all the way from 1 all the way around to 9, and we looked at these different points, and each point represents a certain style, or we can call them a personality. But traditionally, these were taught as the different points where we can get trapped by different kind of egoic challenges. And each of those egoic challenges has a cure or something that we can do to work on that challenge. And that's represented by each of these numbers. So the symbol as a whole, this is just a recap, it represents all of the qualities that we, inshallah, would like to embody to become spiritually whole. So all of these kind of higher nature qualities that we hope to develop in ourselves and see developed in those around us. And so the idea of the Enneagram as a spiritual tool is that our journey is going to involve all of these points, but we're going to start from our primary point. So there is this emphasis on, through self-study, through studying some of this material, to finding what is our primary point, what is the place that sort of holds the most power over us, or we see some of those qualities coming up more strongly in ourselves. And finally, the idea behind this is not to identify yourself with any particular personality, any particular type. The point of all this is actually to disidentify ourselves with any particular point on the Enneagram, because each point represents a place where we can kind of get stuck. And so our spiritual journey is to get unstuck from that point and to travel around. And we didn't get into this last time, but if you look up these symbols online, you can see that there's arrows. So each type has arrows to other types, and that represents places to go to grow, places to go to develop some of those qualities that will balance our home-based personality out in. So last week we focused on self-knowledge, so our core motivations and fears, how that impacts us, what are some of our blind spots. And this week we're going to focus on the second part, which is understanding others. And in this case, we're going to focus on understanding children. So if we understand our children, we're going to be able to respond to them with more love and compassion. We're going to be able to practice humility, realizing that they might have a different way than we have, and that's okay. And accepting differences. So accepting differences amongst our children, accepting differences between ourselves and our child. A lot of times we might have this reaction in our head that, like, our child might say something to us and we'll say, well, I never would say something like that to my father or to my mother. If I did, I would have gotten in trouble, or I would have been reprimanded. But recognizing that, like, we live in not just a different time period and framework now, but our children are very different from us, and sometimes we need to read between the lines to figure out what it is that they're trying to communicate, what it is that they're trying to say, and this knowledge of the Enneagram is going to help us do that, because sometimes all we can do is really see their external behavior, but this is sort of giving us a chance to look at what might be behind that behavior, and if we can work with that, we might be more successful in helping them navigate some of the challenges that they face. So these are some of the things that we can gain from our study tonight. So one thing to keep in mind is that nobody can know anyone else's Enneagram type. So even if you have a clue or an idea about your child's type or your spouse's type or anyone's type, the only way you can definitively know your type is if you yourself identify with the motivation of that type. And so that's why It's not an exact science. It's something that you have to figure out over time. So the point of tonight is not to necessarily type your children, because you really can't do that. They're going to have to type themselves if they have an interest in learning, this particular system of understanding yourself. But having said that, there are sort of clues, and there are ways that you can sort of interpret, others' behavior and sort of give you a sense of, why they might be going in the direction that they're going in. So think of it as giving you clues versus you figuring out anything definitive based on what I'm going to share with you. So we can use this framework to understand and appreciate many ways to see the world, learn new strategies to support, understand, and encourage our children. We can actively challenge their type's limiting story by offering opportunities for growth and development. So if you have a sense or a hunch about what your child's story type might be, and I'll get into that tonight, then you can sort of push back against that and kind of encourage them to go in a different direction sometimes, so that they can see strengths that they might not realize that they have. And finally, what I love most about this material is it allows us to really step back and allow our children to be who they really are versus who we imagine them to be or who we wish them to be. And so it's really giving our children a certain kind of respect and freedom to develop in their own way, of course, with our guidance, with us teaching them all the things that we want to teach them, but at the same time, really respecting that they are their own person and they're going to do things in the way that works best for them. And we're free to advise them, encourage them, coach them, support them, but ultimately we can't control that. So this is the images that we were using last time. So I'm going to, again, go around the circle, but this time I'm going to focus on a child's perspective versus the adult perspective that we had talked about last time. So I'm going to hopefully make it around the circle, and inshallah, I hope we have time at the end for some conversation and feedback. So I'll try not to spend too long on each number. So starting again at type 1, called the perfectionist, sometimes called the teacher, the activist, the organizer. This is a type that naturally has these traits. So you'll notice this in a child who has, I'll call it like a 1-ish tendency, that these children tend to be very responsible, orderly, conscientious, tend to be obedient, very hardworking. They try to live up to this internal standard that they have inside, that they want to do things the right way. Each type has what's called an unconscious message that they may have picked up that results in the development of this personality. So again, a few weeks ago, Rachel talked about how children create stories. So the Enneagram is really just an example of how children can create a story and then create a whole personality around that story. So in the case of type 1, the story that's created is, it's not really okay to make mistakes. Mistakes are something that are bad. It's better to do things right the first time. Another unconscious message that a 1-ish child might pick up is that they really need to be responsible, even from a young age. So fooling around, being silly, not cleaning up after yourself, being too loud, rambunctious, those things are really not okay. So again, it could be something that they pick up from the environment. It could be something that you've expressly told your child. There's so many reasons why a child may pick up on the storyline or create the storyline. So again, it's not about, I did X and therefore Y happened with my child, but it's a story that is created. And of course, the environment might play a role in that. But it's really not possible to know, how and when this story gets created. So the strategy then for that child is, I will be good. So I will be so good that no one will ever be able to criticize me. And so the kind of archetype of the type 1 child is really that good girl, that good boy who does their homework, finishes their plate, doesn't argue, goes to bed on time. They're really motivated by this idea of being good and being seen as good. What they need to hear from us, and this is sort of the hidden message of the type 1 personality, is that you are good in and of yourself and it's okay to make mistakes. So getting that reinforcement that, it's not something that they have to necessarily strive so hard for, that they do have a good fitra. They are innately good. That's how Allah has created us. And so there's this recognition that they need to hear about their own sense of goodness. So for each type, I created kind of a couple of ideas for how to support a child of that type. So just supporting a type 1 child, oops, I'm sorry. Not sure why it's going back and forth. Oh, I think my computer froze. Let me see if I can.
Try using the mouse.
What's that?
Try using the mouse instead of key.
Oh, yes, you're right. The mouse helped. Okay. Yeah, I was using the keys. Okay, so ways to support the type 1 child: encourage them to play, to relax, to let loose each day. This might sound like a funny thing to have to encourage your child to do, but again, it's kind of pushing back on that more serious nature of wanting to focus on work. Reminding them that only Allah is perfect. They might have this desire to be perfect or to have perfection in everything that they do, trying very hard in school and all the things that they do. So just reminding them that only Allah is perfect. We're only human. We try our best, and Allah judges us by our intentions. Modeling for them how to handle mistakes and failure with compassion, with grace. So, if they catch us berating ourselves for just the smallest mistake, they're going to kind of replay that script in their own mind of seeing how we're so hard on ourselves, so they might also be hard on themselves, if not now, then in the future. Being mindful that, there is pressure that they feel inside to get things right. So just being conscious that they might have an anxiety around like doing things the right way or things being done a certain way, maybe wanting, the house to be kept a certain way or arranged a certain way. They just might have certain standards that they're trying to uphold that we might not be aware of. And creating opportunities for them to get into their body, get into their heart center. This helps relieve tension, relieve stress, could be through sports or the creative arts. And again, this is something that I'll recommend for children of any type, but specifically I mentioned it here. So the next type is called the helper, the pleaser, the special friend. So this is a child who generally is very much trying to seek out opportunities to be helpful, to be kind, to be generous. They tend to have a sense that their role is to be there for other people, to kind of have this role of being, the special friend or the caring person. So use the mouse here. So one of the unconscious messages that they pick up on, or they create, the story that they create is, it's not okay to focus too much on your own needs. Don't be selfish. Don't talk so much about what you want and what you like and, what your priorities are. It's better to focus on what other people need. So interestingly, type 2, which we talked about last week, is often seen as the archetype that we teach women in our society. So this idea of kind of being selfless and caring for others. So many women might think that there are 2 because it's an often a common mistype, because this is a message that we often give that, don't think too much about yourself, think about others, think about how to serve others. So the strategy for a type 2 child is, I'll be very helpful, so helpful that I won't be rejected by anyone. I want to be liked. I want to have friends. I want people to think I'm a nice person. So there's this sense of really wanting to tend to the needs of others. And again, these are not strategies that are thought out. It's more, these are actually natural characteristics that emerge. But as we go into adulthood, we might be able to recognize that there is this intentionality around it because there's a fear behind it. And really, this is the case with all the Enneagram types. The intentionality is what makes one healthy versus unhealthy. So the intentionality of helping, if one is helping truly for the sake of helping the other, the sake of Allah, that is the high side of this type, for example. But the low side of the type could be when our intentionality becomes something else, that I need to help others to feel good about myself, or I need to help others so that I get recognition. And so that's where you find the high and the low of each type. And it really comes down to the intention. So what they need to hear is that you are wanted and your feelings matter too. So this is something that kind of they're craving to hear, but they may not hear it as often as they need to. So with type 2s, encourage them to share their feelings openly with you. They might not be as forthcoming because they're focused on other people's feelings. Remind them that Allah is Al-Wali, the special friend, and he's always there to listen to our needs and those of others. Sometimes they might feel like they're always the one who's getting the phone call or the text from their friends who need support, but they also need support. And so giving them that support and reminding them that Allah is there to listen to them. We can model how to be compassionate towards others and assertive of our own needs. This is something that's hard for them because they tend to play the role of, again, the compassionate friend, not being able to necessarily assert what they need. Be mindful of how sensitive they are and how important relationships are in their life. So specifically for the type 2, relationships are king. Like, good relationships means my life is going well. So, friendship drama can really affect them. Anything that threatens any of their main relationships, that's going to be very stressful for them. And try to create opportunities for them to develop their own personal hobbies, interests, and talents, anything that gets them into themselves versus thinking about others and what others need and how to please others, because they really need to develop their own sense of self in addition to the helpful qualities that they have. The next type is type 3, the achiever, the best, the role model. So this type, let me just turn the page here. So this type has the natural traits of being very excelling, pragmatic, and image conscious. 3 as children tend to have a very natural confidence, this can-do attitude. They tend to excel in many areas. It could be in academics, sports, social arena, basically any arena that they value or they feel is valued by those around them. Ultimately, they're seeking that feeling of that pat on the back or the good job, the positive attention that lets them know that they're valued and that they matter. The unconscious message that they pick up is it's not okay to just be your authentic self, to be just a regular Joe Schmo, just anybody. You need to be more than that. You need to be extraordinary. And in fact, you need to perform for others or for the crowd to get that feedback that lets you know that you're doing a great job. So their strategy then is to be successful so that they can never be overlooked or their value is never questioned. And this becomes a strategy for life. So they build their life around goals and not necessarily being aware that they're doing this. It just comes naturally to them to set targets for achievement because this kind of gives them that approval that they're looking for. So what they need to hear really is that you are loved for who you are and not just what you do. And this is actually difficult to do because our society, especially in the US, has been described as a type 3 culture. And what we mean by that is our whole culture is set up to support this personality, the one who wants to achieve. We teach our kids to do well in school and to get a good resume so they can get into a good college. We're constantly talking about success. And so it's very easy to pick up this message. And so while it is good to be excelling and successful, the problem with the type 2 personality when it gets too strong is this idea that I'm only loved because of my achievements, or that's the only thing that matters about me is how good I am at, X sport or how good I am at school or academics. So ways to support type 3s are encouraging them to talk about why they value what they do. So again, coming back to intention. So you're good at all these things. You're president of your class and you're captain of this team and you're doing this and you're doing that, you're doing all these things. So why are you doing these things? Like what's your intention around it and why is it important to you? Reminding them that Allah is Al-Mu'izz, the bestower of honor, and that this is in fact our highest goal. So our highest goal is not to get the praise of others or to win the award. At the end of the day, our highest goal is to please Allah. So just reminding them of that intentionality. We ourselves, can we model how to be achievement-oriented and present and grounded with the important people in our life? So, how much time do we spend focusing on our work and our achievements versus how much time we spend, in very kind of present communication with our family members or those around us? Are we making time for the other things that matter, for community, for prayer, for contemplation, for all of these kind of non-doing activities that are not part of any bigger achievement or goal, but it's actually a way of us really remembering what's most important in life. Be mindful of how meaningful their performances and achievements are, and make sure you show up. So, if your child is an achiever and they do score the winning goal, but their parents weren't there to see it, that's going to be hard for them. That's going to be hurtful. Or, if they were chosen for the lead role in the play, but, you didn't think theater was important, so you didn't come to cheer them on. They might remember that and be like, feeling bad that those who are closer to them didn't acknowledge some of the things that they were good at. Make sure to create opportunities for them to engage in activities that are non-competitive too, that can be creative and restorative, so that they can do some things that are not just about winning the prize, but are actually just about maybe relaxation or exploring something just for the sake of exploring it. Okay, so the next type is type 4, the intense creative, also called the romantic, the poet, the artist, the special one. So this type is very sensitive, expressive, can sometimes be dramatic or temperamental. I know those of you who have toddlers are probably saying, of course, this is my child, but don't judge them too quickly. All children can be dramatic or have a lot of emotions. So the unconscious message for this type is, it's not okay to be too ordinary or too happy. I must play the role of the unique person. So this one might be a little bit harder for us to figure out on the surface. But forest children can be friendly, they can be warm, they can also be shy or reserved. They might sometimes wonder, if they belong in the group. Will other people accept me? Will they understand me? So they could be introverted or extroverted. They tend to have very strong likes and dislikes, and they can get very easily overwhelmed by their emotions. So for example, if they have a fight with, they might not come to the dinner table because they might be, in their room thinking about what happened. As a teen, they might be really into soul searching and poetry and understanding the meaning of things. They're really trying to create their own unique understanding on the world and their own unique personality. Their strategy is, I will be unique, so unique that no one can take away my story and its special significance. So this might come out as, a unique style of dressing or a unique way of looking at things. It's really about being an individual and not really blending in. So that can show up in a lot of different ways. What they need to hear is that you are seen, you are understood, and you are loved. So they often feel a sense that other people don't understand them. They don't understand the way that they feel or the way they're thinking about things. They can be sometimes difficult to talk to if they're in an emotional mood. So sometimes, it's not just listening to them, but just giving them that general feeling that they're accepted the way that they are. And, even if you can't understand them in that moment, that, you're going to take the time to try to understand their perspective. So some things that we can do to encourage them is, one thing is that they, despite their kind of drama or temperamentality, they actually have a very soft and kind heart. So encouraging them to volunteer in the community, this helps shift their focus onto helping others. It could be volunteering with the elderly, volunteering with animals. They actually have like a very altruistic kind of kind heart. And that's part of why emotions are so important to them, because they have a deep kind of feeling kind of heart. So they're affected a lot by things. They're affected by others' suffering. They have a lot of compassion naturally. Remind them that Allah is al-Shaheed, He's the witness. He sees us fully for who we are. He sees our struggles. Sometimes they might feel like nobody sees their struggles. So reminding them again that Allah sees everything. We can model how to honor our own feelings and those of others, and how to develop emotional intelligence. So that's sort of their superpower in life later on, that because they have this deep feeling and this open heart, if they're able to use that in the right way, they can be masters of emotional intelligence, which is actually a very hard skill to have. Many of us don't have the skill of really understanding how other people feel and how to help them. Be mindful of how deeply they do feel about things and how difficult it can be to cope with feelings of sadness or disappointment. So they might have highs and lows. So just not worrying too much about that, but being there for them and making sure they have a good support network, whether through you or through their friends or other people in the community, and creating opportunities for them to let that creative energy out, like, could be through music, theater, or special hobbies. Type 5 is the quiet specialist, the observer, the thinker, the expert. So this is a child, and these images are just kind of fun images that I selected. So don't worry if your child doesn't look like the image. It's just kind of a fun caricature of the type. So this is a child who is very curious. They're often the ones who are holed up in their rooms with their books and their Legos. They could be unaware of, other people and what they're doing, because they're just very happy to spend time on their own special interests. It doesn't mean that they don't have friends or they don't socialize, but it just means they have this ability to be very content on their own, as long as they have something to focus on, something that really grabs their attention. One of the messages that they pick up is, it's not okay to get too comfortable in this world where you don't really belong. You must play the role of the knowledgeable person. And so what that means is that they might get this sense that, we shouldn't demand too many things of other people. It's better to be sort of self-sufficient, keep to yourself, do your own thing, and learn more about the world, learn more about how things work. And that's sort of your way of dealing with this external world, is by using knowledge. So their strategy, and again, these are all unconscious. They're not actual strategies that your child is using, but these are kind of unconscious. So I will be smart, so smart that I won't need to ask anyone for help with anything. So part of what they need to hear is your needs are not a problem. So they might have a sense that maybe it's problematic for them to have needs or to ask for things, and they should, be kind of minimalist when it comes to their own needs. So we can encourage them to open themselves up to others by asking questions about themselves and their interests. They actually love to talk about their interests. Remind them that Allah is Al-Hakim. He is the wise and the only true source of all wisdom. We can model how to create a balance between their solitary pursuits of the mind and the need to socialize and be present with others. They actually do have a need for that as well, even though they seem to be happy often doing their own thing. Be mindful of how sensitive they are and how important it is for them to have some alone time and space to process things. So, sometimes they, especially as teens, they might just want to be alone in their room working on their own thing and, not even come out for dinner. And sometimes they need that space to just recharge. And that's common with people who are introverted, that they can be around other people, but they still need that time to just be alone and think things through. And create opportunities for them to get into their physical bodies through practices like martial arts, sports, and physical play. So again, this is a way of balancing sort of that cerebral energy that they naturally have. Type 6, this one is a little bit harder to figure out. It's called many different things: the loyalist, the buddy, the guardian, the questioner. This is a type where, as adults, people often can't really figure out if they're this type. So it's a little bit almost harder to pin down. And so you'll see that based on the pictures I put here. One represents the happy-go-lucky, easygoing buddy. The other one represents a child who looks anxious about finishing their schoolwork. So some natural traits about 6s are they're often loyal and kind, but there's actually 2 types of 6s. One type is a rule follower and the other is anti-authoritarian. So it depends which way they decide to go. The base of this type being a type of fear and anxiety around who can I trust and what is the truth? So they're looking for answers in their environment. So one of the messages that they internalize is it's not okay for them to trust their own intuition and their own judgments. Therefore, they have to sort of question those around them and figure out, almost like a detective, what is really true, what's not true, how do I decide who is trustworthy and who is not? So they might play the role of a cautious questioner, questioning things, questioning norms, society, or they might go in the other direction and become almost what looks like a fearless daredevil. So someone who's kind of strong and confrontational and doesn't seem to have fears of anything. So again, type 6 is interesting because they have 2 different strategies. On the one hand, they might decide to be cautious, so they won't be taken by surprise by anyone or anything. On the other hand, they might decide to meet their fears head on as a way to prove that they're not afraid of anything. So it really depends on, and sometimes 6s can go back and forth between these 2 things. So sometimes being overly cautious and other times being overly uncautious. The missing thing that they need to hear or they need to feel is that they are safe, that they are going to be protected and taken care of, and they don't need to constantly have their, spidey sense up or their kind of questioning mind up. Some things to do to encourage them would be helping them work through any doubts or fears they might have, because they often are dealing with these things on their own without talking about them with anybody, because they also tend to keep their cards close to their chest. So you might not realize that they are even thinking about these things or what it is that they're struggling with, because they might just kind of put on a happy or easygoing front. Remind them that Allah is Al-Mani, He's the preventer of harm, and He is the true source of safety and security. Sixes are always seeking safety and security, so just reminding them again that Allah is the one who can give us that true sense of that. Model how to create a balance between acknowledging your own fears and taking action despite that fear. So the high side of fear has to do with courage, feeling fear but still acting in the face of that fear, feeling anxiety but still kind of doing what needs to be done. So, can we model that for them or give them a way for them to work through any fears that they have? Be mindful about their anxiety and what they might be feeling, give them strategies to deal with it, and create opportunities for them to experience success, because sometimes they can be doubtful of their own abilities. Other times they can be, seem very confident. They might be, again, like the class president, or doing very well, but they might have some doubts inside that they're not sharing with others. Okay, so we have a couple more types. I think we can finish up in the next 5 or 6 minutes. So the next one is type 7, often called the enthusiast, the visionary, the energizer, the multitasker. So a child of this type tends to be very fun-loving, have a sunny disposition, can be very curious, also very charming. They can kind of charm their way around mommy and daddy's rules, or whatever it is that you want them to do. They're just sort of like irresistibly charming sometimes. Their unconscious message that they have is it's not okay to depend on others for my fulfillment, so that they must play the role of the go-getter or the optimistic free spirit. So the idea here is they have this sense that they need to go out and get whatever it is that they want, and they're going to find a way to get what that is or do what they want to do. Thus the idea of being a free spirit. The strategy is I'll make good things happen in my life and I'll stay positive at all times, so no one can ever bring me down or limit me. So they tend to be very optimistic, very kind of looking on the bright side of things. One of the things that they need to hear is that they'll be taken care of. So under that, there might be a fear that, they won't get their needs met or they won't be taken care of. And that's why they're so independent when it comes to all the things that they want to do. Oops, it went back again. Sorry. Let me see if I can bring back the other slide. Okay. So ways to support 7s: encourage them to be honest about what they're feeling and experiencing, especially during difficult times. Because they're so optimistic, it's hard for them to acknowledge any difficulties they're having or sad feelings, or anything that's not positive is hard for them to acknowledge. So just be aware of that and help them work through that if they do need someone to talk to about something. Remind them that Allah is Al-Fatah. He's the one who opens the way for us and makes all things possible. The type 7 often feels that they have to make things happen and make things possible. So reminding them again that that's Allah's role to kind of pave the way for us and to really make things happen. Model how to create a balance between fun and duty by making time for both. They tend to be kind of the kid who doesn't want to do their chores or brush their teeth or do their homework because they're sort of busy with other more interesting things or more fun things. Be mindful of how much they value independence and allow them to do things their own way and in their own time. They don't like to be micromanaged or to have too many rules put on them. And also create opportunities for them to develop their leadership skills while also keeping them grounded, like, for example, by giving them chores. They tend to be natural leaders. They're very smart, very quick. They're the kid who really understands what the teacher is teaching in the first 5 minutes and then, sort of wants to leave or read a book because they sort of get concepts very quickly. And so they have a very quick mind and they sort of want to move on to the next thing. Type 8, this is called the leader, the controller, the asserter, the protector. Natural traits they have: confidence, being street smart, exuberant, strong-willed. Some people consider this one of the harder types to parent because even as a child, you can see they have a very strong will that won't be bent or shaped according to your will. So they have to really want to do something in order to do it. The message that they unconsciously take on is it's not okay to show vulnerability. So just like type 2 was a message that's reinforced for women, this is a message that's often reinforced for boys or men. So this idea that you need to be strong, it's not good to be vulnerable or to show your soft side or to cry. So it's better to be strong. So their strategy is to be strong and assertive so that others cannot hurt them or those who they love. So they want to protect themselves. They want to protect those they love. What they need to hear is that they will be protected, that they will be taken care of. So they don't always need to be the strong one. Some ways to support a type 8 child: encourage them to share their softer emotions with you. Sometimes they might not be willing to do that in public or in a group, but letting them know that there is a place where they can show their vulnerability. Remind them that Allah is Al-Hafiz, the protector, He's the preserver, He's the one who is the source of all security and strength. So they don't always have to be playing that role of the strong person or the strongest one. We can model how to balance strength and vulnerability. So yes, you can be strong and you can be assertive and you can have all these great qualities that are leadership qualities, but at the same time, you can also cry, you can also feel sad, you can also show your softer side. Be mindful of how they might seem bold and confident on the inside, but they might still feel weak or feel afraid on the inside. They still need our loving, tender support. Create opportunities for them to expend all that energy. So they tend to have a lot of energy. They're the kind of kid who's bouncing off the walls, like throwing the ball around. Like, give them opportunities for them to let that energy out through sports, through movement, through social activities, because they really need a place to put all the energy that they have. Finally, we have type 9, called the Peacemaker, the Healer, the Reconciler, the Seeker. Their natural traits are being gentle, sensitive, accepting, sometimes indecisive. These are kids who are generally very easy to deal with. The one that the teacher will say, you know, she's a pleasure to have in my class because, you know, she always does what I ask her to do. So there's a sense of just being very easygoing, going with the flow, not really making too big a deal of themselves. The unconscious message here is it's not okay to assert yourself. So they pick up this idea that it's better not to make too big a deal of yourself, to assert your needs or your wants. It's better to kind of hang back a little bit and, you know, blend in so that you don't really disturb the flow of things. So they play the role of the easygoing person. The strategy is I will be agreeable, so I never have to deal with conflict or confrontation. Again, not a conscious strategy. It's just a natural tendency that they fall into, being very agreeable and kind of easy to get along with. What they need to hear is that their presence matters. So it does matter what flavor ice cream they want. It does matter what movie they want to see. It does matter, you know, which type of clothing that they want to pick out. They might easily give away their rights or easily give away their preferences. So it's important to let them know that they as an individual also count. We can encourage them by encouraging them to speak up about their likes, their dislikes, their areas of interest. We can remind them that Allah is As-Salam, the source of all peace, and He alone can bring peace into our hearts. Type 9s later in life start to feel like, you know, it's their responsibility to make sure everybody feels good and is at peace, and they feel a sense of ownership around the group energy. So reminding them that, you know, it's Allah's role to bring peace into our hearts. They don't have to give up all their rights or their qualities in order to make other people happy. Model how to be nice and assertive. So this is something that's hard for type 9s. How can you be nice and supportive and going with the flow, but also assert yourself sometimes? Also let people know what you really think and what you feel. We can model the importance of having grit and perseverance despite discomfort or failure. So 9s do have a strong inner core, but sometimes they need help kind of bringing that out. But be mindful of how sensitive they are to being dominated by others and how easily they put aside their priorities. So these are gentle souls, so they don't respond well to, you know, yelling or threats or kind of dominating behavior. And create opportunities for them to learn concrete skills that build their confidence and sense of personal power. such as martial arts or creative spaces. They really need help developing their own sense of who am I in the world and what am I good at. Okay, so the last slide that I'll share is this idea that learning this material is really going to help us see how diversity serves the collective. So I chose this quote. It says, with the tools to explore further into our inner landscapes, we gain the awareness to support ourselves and others more compassionately. The more we understand our unique features, the more we appreciate how our diversity serves the collective. We learn that though we may walk differently, we always walk together. And this is a quote from an article about the Enneagram and how it can be used to understand ourselves, understand others, understand our families, as well as our workplaces. So this idea that it's important to see all these different lenses and see how all these different lenses serve the collective. It's important to have these different perspectives and these different qualities, because that brings these different features together that are really important. So some reflection questions that I would pose to all of you to reflect on together tonight or on your own. What is our family constellation of archetypes? If you were to guess or come up with your own map of your family, how does this create a unique group energy in our family? And what were my parents' Ennea styles? How might that have influenced my development? That's something interesting to think about. How you were parented, how some of the messages you received might have impacted you. And I also have a couple of books here that if you want to explore these concepts further on your own, you can take a look at these. I can also put them in the chat, some of these titles. The book that I used for some of tonight's presentation to prepare was The Enneagram of Parenting by Elizabeth Weigel. So she also has a couple of different books out on the Enneagram. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Let me stop my share. And then let me pass it back to Dr. Faisal to moderate the discussion. And I think we said we would stop the recording at the end of the presentation, so I can do that.
Okay, Jazakallah.